Hello and welcome to Culture Vibes, the Federal's special program in which we talk to writers and artists about their work. Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister of Canada, has brought a fresh, progressive vision to Canadian politics, but his premiership has not been without its own set of challenges. Son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, he has carved out his own distinct path. He's someone who has championed diversity, inclusion, and environmental sustainability, but his reign has also been turbulent for a variety of reasons. A new biography reveals in great detail Trudeau government's successes and failures. The book, titled The Prince and the Turbulent Reign of Justin Trudeau by Stephen Maher, award-winning investigative journalist and a Harvard Nieman fellow who has also written three novels, has just been published by Simon and Schuster. Mr. Maher is joining us from Ottawa. Welcome to the show, Mr. Maher. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join you.
So, straight off the bat, the book, describes Mr. Trudeau as an enigma in the sense that it talks about his carefully guarded inner self, and you draw a comparison between his father image also, and you write that early on in the book that he was also somebody who carefully composed mask to the world, and he would not be giving the public access to his inner life. In this respect, how do you think Justin Trudeau is different from his father, or is similar? He also wears a mask and has a very, very carefully crafted public persona.
Well, his father was a more, he had a greater sense of remove. Part of his charisma was this kind of coldness and an intellectual quality that created a kind of tension in his presence. In that he often would surprise and say cryptic and interesting things. Justin, his son, doesn't have the same sort of intellectual gravity, and he doesn't have the same sort of remove and mystery. His mask is, as one person put it to me in research, a mask of affability. By career, he was a teacher, and he is like a friendly, nice teacher, is the image that he projects. And what makes him unusual maybe from other politicians is that because of his childhood, he was subject to scrutiny from quite a small age. And it appears that he is able to sort of project a mask at all times, and so it's quite difficult to know the real Justin Trudeau.
Right, and the very fact that he also had a traumatic childhood, and you write in great detail in the book. Do you see that connection also somewhere? The fact that his mother left early when he was very young, about 5 year old?
Yes, yeah. Yes, when he was about 5 years old, on his parents' 6th wedding anniversary, instead of being with her husband, Pierre Trudeau, Margaret Trudeau showed up at a famous rock and roll bar in Toronto called the Alma Combo, where the Rolling Stones were playing. And then she left Canada and went apparently with the Rolling Stones to New York. And she never really came back after that. She went through a period where she was going to Studio 54, which was a famous nightclub in New York, and having romances with famous American actors. And she was suffering from undiagnosed mental illness. She had bipolar disorder, which she later has written about and has been very helpful to people through her memoirs and public speaking and talking about mental health. But while Justin was small, his mother was largely absent from his life. And people who know him well believe that this was a traumatic childhood. He was in a an environment of power and privilege and wealth. But what good is all of that if you are deprived of mother's love? So it marked him and made him different from most people. In that, for one thing, as the family continued, he is the oldest son of a complicated, ultimately a family with other children from other marriages. And he ends up being in this role of kind of the oldest kid who's trying to keep it all together. And who is also the subject of great interest on the part of other people at school, he's in the street. So he's accustomed his whole life to people projecting feelings onto him of different kinds, positive and negative. People trying to get close to him, people trying to use him, people despising him for no reason. So his life is very different from the lives of most people we know.
And how do you see his, you're right, of course, but if you could talk about how he's invested in this idea of keeping this facade, or at least keeping these two selves distinct, like his public and his private. Both selves are, different, and they never meet, perhaps.
Well, I mean, of course, I don't know the inner Justin Trudeau. My experiences have all been with a sort of public man, who I have found in my personal dealings with him to be invariably gracious and friendly and nice. All politicians have a different face when they're behind closed doors with their trusted staff. Many of the people who work with him closely talk about how kind he is and how much they appreciate him. People in a slightly wider ring find him remote and cold. And I was surprised when I was researching the book at people who I would have thought he would take time to know, that he had not taken time to know them. So he can seem cold and distant to other people. By all appearances, he's a loving father and a good friend to his close friends. His marriage has recently broken up, and so that appears to have been a period of great stress, which also happened to be a period of great political stress. In the book, I describe it as his annus horribilis, which
Yes,
your viewers may recall was the word that the British Queen used to describe a terrible year in the past.
yes. So you're right that perhaps this was something the way they broke up, and the way their relationship was strained for it was sort of coming, and you quote people saying that had he actually left office last year, perhaps he could have been able to salvage the marriage. What do you think? It would that have really worked, or this was something that was a foregone conclusion? It was bound to happen.
I don't know, and I'm by training and experience a political journalist, so I start
Right.
to feel uncomfortable when I get too far into sort of family reporting, if you know what I mean. My interest is in Justin Trudeau as a public figure. So what I included in the book is what people around him say, right? Now, these are people also who support him and care about him. And so the one reason why they're saying that is because they admire him, and they're saying he decided the country was more important than his marriage. So is that true, or is that propaganda? I am not in a position to judge.
Right. But the talking about his political persona, what do you think? I mean, you describe him as a charismatic person, and you have spoken about his affability, his empathy, and what did actually work in his what did actually work in his favor? As a leader who could take control. I mean, even though he had a strained relationship with his brother over it when it was all happening. And there's an interesting. I would also like to you to discuss this early bit in the book when you write that he had this sort of because he is also someone who has been into boxing for the last for 25 years. He was into boxing for 25 years, and this early this charity boxing match that he had with Patrick Rousseau, and how did that sort of change his image early on in his career?
So that was an extraordinary kind of thing to happen in politics. Until that moment, no one was sure how seriously to take him. He had become a politician, and which was easier for him. Still not easy. He had to do the difficult political work. But he had not distinguished himself with serious policy work. People thought he was a good-looking and charismatic lightweight. One of these people who show up and photographs well, but isn't going to do the difficult political work. And his public persona was of a lightweight, somewhat feminine. He had a kind of, he seemed sort of vain and unmanly, and people would attack him for that. But he had been training as a boxer for all these years in Montreal, and he knew that he was a good boxer. And so before launching his campaign to become leader of the Liberal Party, he did a charity boxing match and challenged this guy, Patrick Brazeau, who was a pretty tough-looking guy from an Indigenous background, had been a soldier, had big muscles, and was a trash talker. Before the fight, he was promising that he was going to beat the stuffing out of Justin Trudeau. But Trudeau knew all along. One of the extraordinary things about him is he has this kind of princely confidence. And he told people, I'm going to beat him. Brazeau had trained in karate, and Trudeau said, we weren't having a karate fight. We were having a boxing match. And Brazeau hit him hard, but Trudeau knew how to box. And by the end of the match, Brazeau's nose was bleeding, and Trudeau looked like he could happily continue forever, where Brazeau, who smoked cigarettes, was out of breath and couldn't carry on. And this is what really begins. This was a transformative moment. And a colleague of mine noted at the time that at some level, if you look at the character of Canadians, we're kind of lumberjacks. Our roots are in lumber camps and mines, and that for the common people, here's a story of this guy who beats up the other guy, and at a primitive level, it changed everything in the way we saw him.
Right. And then, of course, when he took over, since this book focuses on both his successes and failures, would you sort of give us a sense of his achievements, and where do you see him going wrong? And I mean, of course, he undertook some major decisions as a prime minister, including stuff like legalizing marijuana through the Canada Act, and then of course there were other positive steps like that Paris Agreement on climate change and stuff. But if you compare, what is the assessment that you make?
Well, I think he's been very important, and he did a lot of things. To me, the most important, in a way, is one of the first things he did. He brought in a new child benefit package, so that every Canadian of modest means who now, when they have children, they get a lot of money from the government. And so that dramatically cut down on the number of children growing up in need, in poverty, which I think is an enormous success. If you think about the strains on young parents when they can't afford to provide for their children. And I suspect that will be doing good things for our country for many years to come, because it means these people will be healthier and happier and better, more productive in their lives. On climate, we have brought down emissions. It's been very difficult politically, but with a carbon tax that may not outlast his government. It's very unpopular now. And he worked hard at reconciliation with Indigenous people. Canada, a lot of people will tell you Canada is built on stolen land. And there are stains on our national honor that he has made a sustained effort to work on, although at times he's made stupid mistakes. And I still think that it's important. And the effort and money that he has put in it is not proportionate to its usefulness as a vote-getting device. So it appears to be based on a sincere desire to improve this difficult issue. Those are the big pieces. Politically, he beat 3 Conservatives in a row. He helped reshape the image of Canada as a progressive place. He made he behaved in a progressive way about women and Canada's multicultural communities, putting them at the heart of his government. He has political reasons because he wants the votes from those communities and the votes from women. But nonetheless, that's an important part of what he did. So a lot of it, in a sense, is reassembling his father's old political coalition and political ideas.
Right. And also the fact that, the liberal stance on Gaza, for instance, and Canada's stance, very ambivalent in a sense. And how do you? That must have been a tightrope walk, isn't it? And it was the same when Trump came to power. Then also he had to do that bit of a tightrope walking, isn't it?
Yes, the Trump piece was extremely important because we are extremely dependent on trade with the United States, and Trump demanded that Canada renegotiate its trade deal and was repeatedly provocative. And I believe that the Canadians out-negotiated the Americans on this, and it was partly because Trudeau was able to keep his cool and deal with this lunatic, if I may call, with this criminal. Donald Trump, as of today, we can say that he's a criminal. We knew all along, but now we can say it. So that was a big achievement, and his pandemic management also.
Yeah, but pandemic initial years initial response was not so good, but then he was able to sort of manage it well later. No, isn't it?
Yes, he's a teacher. He believes in listening to the experts and it is my view that the experts were wrong at the beginning of the pandemic because they were too much under the influence of the World Health Organization and afraid of angering China. So it was wise, as we saw some countries, Taiwan and Australia and Singapore, were quicker to shut down travel than Canada was. But once the expert advice was correct, he was correct.
There is a chapter about. There's brief description of and you describe it as a disaster. His visit to India, and it was in a sense because the whole purpose was defeated, and Indo-Canadian ties have gone into a tailspin ever since, and in recent years only worsened. So, if you could talk a bit about that. how that was kind of a diplomatic disaster, and what sort of what could he possibly have done to redeem it, or was it was had he reached a point where there was not much that he could do?
Well, I think there were two problems with it,
Mhm.
and a deeper problem underneath it all. Uh, at that time, Trudeau was extremely popular around the world. He would be treated like a matinee idol when he went places. Um, and I think that his office, he personally, and the people around him thought that that would make everything easier than it was. But I don't think the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, was among that admiring crowd at the time. And so the Trudeau people failed to anticipate the difficulties. And the trip was structured as though it was Will and Kate, as though it was a royal tour instead of a typical Western politician coming and trying to sell chickpeas. I understand that in India, you consume a lot of Canadian chickpeas, and we think that's important. I didn't hear Justin Trudeau talking about that or doing anything about it. He was behaving as though he was on an exciting family trip, like a celebrity. And so the sort of two problems were that there was too many photo ops, and some in the Indian media started to laugh at him and say, "Well, this seems like a cheap Bollywood show. What's he doing, putting on all these costumes?" And the second problem was that Modi, Prime Minister Modi, was more hostile than they anticipated, and it was a chillier and more difficult official reception than they had expected. Um, and so you have these two things happening at once, and then this nightmare where a convicted Khalistani terrorist from Canada was on the guest list of one of the Canadian events, and then they tried to explain it away, and an official blamed the Indian Secret Service, and they could not. One bad thing led to another bad thing. But underneath it all, I believe, is a difficulty that is hard to resolve between the government of India and the government of Canada. The relationship is very important to Canada, and we are so fortunate to have this dynamic, productive, intellectual Indian Canadian community. But a big part of that community is a Sikh community that it appears in some ways to be trapped in the past as regards the question of Khalistan. And it's a political problem for the Liberals because that community is very important politically. And if you look at the terrible disaster of the Air India flight, and Canada's failures in that regard, there's a lingering great difficulty between the two countries, and it seems to me it should be a higher priority for the Canadians to deal with that, and I hope that I think it will take a different prime minister to improve that.
And some of the recent developments, like the killing of that Canadian national, of course, Hardeep Singh Major, and whom India sees as the terrorist of the Khalistani Tiger Force. When he was killed, you think that that also sort of completely strained the relationship, and that's something that we have not been able to resolve so far.
No, no. That's the kind of thing that typically assassinating people who hold your passport. If someone does that, that's not a very friendly thing. So I think this is it's not something that allied and friendly countries typically do to one another. Yes. And I suspect, our prime minister, your prime minister, they are both temporary figures. I suspect that when there are two different people in those jobs, that both sides will recognize that the relationship may need a reset.
Right. Some of the issues for which he has both been praised and criticized, issues like the migrant crisis. I mean, of course, the some countries of the world which are facing this problem would appreciate Canada's stance on the fact that Mr. Trudeau has been really compassionate in that sense. But at home, he has been criticized for the very same reason that that Canada was the country that welcomed 1.3 million migrants in just 1 year, apparently. How do you look at this?
We made a mistake. He made a mistake
Okay.
because we don't have enough housing.
Hmm.
One of the things, and I've studied the history of this. Canada's immigration history is glorious. We have managed this without all of the same tension that you find in the United States or the United Kingdom or France. And that's largely a matter of geography. We are so far from the countries where people come that we have a tradition of inviting very well-educated people, and a second tradition of being open to refugees from during the Soviet era, after the First World War, at the time when Vietnam fell to the Viet Cong. We are always opening the doors. And my own experience in life, going to school, that you would know, oh, that guy, his parents are from Hungary. They came after the war. She's Vietnamese. Her parents came from Vietnam. This is, in my view, an important part of our tradition. But we had a labor shortage at the end of the pandemic, and they just opened the gates, including to many students from India, temporary foreign workers, students, and it helped contribute to a housing crisis, so that every day now we're talking about people who have to live in tents in the city. And it was Trudeau's job to see that coming, and he appeared not to see it. And we have to slow down until we get housing organized. And my great hope is that this will not affect the generally welcoming tradition and culture of Canada in a long-term way.
Right. We started with Trudeau as an enigma, and I wanted to ask you if writing this book has helped you solve some pieces of the puzzle and help you somewhat understand his persona, both if not private, then public, better.
I think so. Yeah, I've spoken to so many people about him, and I
Right.
sat with him for an hour and talked to him, and I think I have a better sense of him now, and it's been interesting because he's a historically important sort of figure for our country, and for better or for worse, or for better and for worse, he has been the face of Canada around the world for the last decade, and that's everyone is kind of tired of him now in Canada and around the world. The brand is a little ragged, but it's been interesting that people around the world knew who our leader was.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what makes him, the way he is? If that's a question, I mean, for that, of course, we'll have to go back to, his roots and how he began and his childhood and stuff. But is there anything that you can put your fingers on and say that okay, the way he's built and the way he's perhaps the leader that he is due to certain, this thing. Okay, this is something that you have been able to sort of resolve in your mind somewhere.
So there is one moment that he wrote about in his memoir that I talk about in my book that struck
Yeah.
me as being
Mm,
noteworthy.
mm,
When he was a student in junior high or high school
yeah.
in Montreal, um, you know what teenage boys are like. They would look for weakness in their classmates. And there was a photograph of his mother in that was published in an American pornographic magazine, in which she was partly revealed her body. He had never seen that until a student in his class went up and put it in front of his face to try to provoke a reaction. And he wrote that he was able to maintain an icy demeanor, that he knew that if he reacted emotionally, that he would be giving that fellow what he was looking for. This is not a normal experience from childhood. So this sets him apart, this kind of thing. That's how I see him, is he is not like most people that we meet in our lives.
Well, on that note, Ms. Maher, thank you so much for talking to us. It was great having this conversation.